Yana Toboso is most known for her work on Black Butler and Twisted Wonderland. Amazing art, engaging storytelling, and beautiful character design. But today, I'm more interested in her work that she did before hitting it big with Black Butler. Under the Yana Toboso pen name, she's accredited to a few other works and anthologies, but the series she made right before Black Butler is my main point of interest today. Rust Blaster is a 6-chapter series published in G Fantasy from November 2005 to April 2006, then compromised in a single volume that was released at the end of May in 2006 in Japan, and later in August 2015 in English. Wow. I wonder if the popularity of Black Butler had anything to do with Rust Blaster getting an official translation almost a decade later. Rust Blaster itself, though, is not as beloved as Black Butler. A common sentiment is that it's just not as good, but can still be a fun read. I'm not sure how much weight this holds, but Rust Blaster is rated at a 7.3 on my anime list, which is 7.3 out of 10 is pretty good, but it's only scored by 5,592 users, so I'm gonna sit down today and read it myself, so share my thoughts, see if I think it's earned that 7.3. Rust Blaster is a story set in a world where vampires live alongside humans in peace. Our main characters are students at Millennium Academy, a school where elite vampires train to keep the balance of the world. These vampires possess special powers that manifest in what's called a family weapon. However, the main character, Aldred, can't manifest one. In fact, he's not like the other vampires. He's a little goofy, doesn't like drinking blood, and often finds himself getting into trouble. However, his father is the president of the school, which many of his peers believe is the reason he's able to attend and also be a class leader despite all of his shortcomings. After we get familiar with Aldred, we're then introduced to the other key player, Yosugata Kei, a human who can turn into a weapon, very Soul Eater-esque. But not just any weapon. No. Kei here can turn into the Holy Lance, a weapon created by the church to fight off vampires. When Aldred drinks Kei's blood, he gains the ability to wield the Holy Lance. However, in doing so, this weakens Kei's body. It's revealed that Kei was meant to more or less sacrifice his life in order for the Holy Lance to be used, and once he lost his human body, he would essentially just turn into the lance, and the weapon would be passed on to the next human sheath. The story follows these two as they go to school and come under attack on the night of the twin moons. After the initial attack, we learn that there's a group of vampires who have been sealed away and are looking to break the seal. It's up to Aldred and Kei and the other students to try their best to save their world from these vampires. After this revelation, the story takes a more laid-back approach for a bit, showing the students in their day-to-day lives, baking a cake for Kei in their cooking class. I will say, though, the story does point out that, hey, even though, the world might end in a few days, since we're not needed at this very moment, it's just business as usual, which I thought was kind of neat. Very much so how a lot of people felt during the height of COVID lockdowns, where it felt like the world was ending, but we were still expected to care about our normal day-to-day things and just pretend nothing was going on. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Very realistic in a way that doesn't feel like it should be realistic, but it is what it is. We also get acquainted with who will become the two main antagonists in the final battle, Septime and Six. Yana Toboso kind of popped off with these character designs, though. These two are vampires, but Six can also turn into a weapon just like Kei. Septime drinks his blood and essentially wields him. This becomes a climactic moment in the final battle, and the moment that prompts Aldred to wield the Holy Lance, despite knowing that it harmed Kei and vowing to find another way previously. They're both okay with it though, because that's what it'll take to protect what's important to them. However, during the battle, both Kei and Six turn back into themselves, weakened by the battle, near death. It is important to note that previously Kei had explained that however much blood Aldred drinks determines how long he can wield the Holy Lance. It's very connected to their physical well-being in a way. And so the fact that both he and Six kind of revert mid-battle makes sense because they are exhausted. And although we don't get to see a whole lot of the battle, just based on how everyone looks afterwards, it was a very intense 1v1 or 2v2? I don't know. It was very intense, or it looked like it was. Despite it all, though, vampires on the other side of the seal are still at danger of breaking through. They're starving. Septime had revealed that vampires originated from the other side of the seal and had come to the human realm to feed. But since they were now barred from entering, vampires turned to eating one another. Family, friends, it didn't matter. It was survival of the fittest, and even the fittest were at risk. The world still in danger, Aldred bravely steps up to fight without his secret special weapon, knowing he'll die. After everyone says their goodbyes, hoping that despite it all he'll come back, we get a time skip into the future. Kei is still alive and is able to get around using a wheelchair. It appears everyone but Aldred is still alive. Honestly, the ending is a little bit unclear. It looks as if Septime and Six are being held somewhere and are being studied and interrogated on something. Something that could be related to helping Kei regain his body functions, or something related to Aldred. It's really unclear. There's an air of grief at the end, but it's one of those optimistic, you may be gone, but you're still here with us in our hearts kind of vibes. This is another point of confusion. To me, it felt like Aldred was dead, but they were still trying to keep him alive in their memory because everything around them reminded them of Aldred. But some readers have come to the conclusion that Aldred is still alive out there. So who knows? I think it was very open-ended on purpose. I hope. Based on the fact that everyone else is alive and well, and we see that the school is still standing, we do know that the seal was never broken, meaning Aldred's plan either did work, or held things up long enough for a better plan to work. Again, it's up in the air. Rust Blaster has very fun aesthetics. It's got a dark and gritty vibe to it, and the characters look straight out of the brain of a vampire-obsessed emo kid from 2012. And I mean this in a good way, by the way. I was one of those kids. We've seen in Black Butler that Yana Toboso does have an eye for the dark and gothic, but it's fun seeing her design characters with a more modern and punk vibe. Guys, I think Yana Toboso might be emo. I think she might be. The story itself is a bit messy, and honestly, there were some parts that I did find a little hard to follow, but that could have also just been the quality of the translation, since I did read this online, not through officially translated means, so that could be a factor. I do still have to say, though, Rust Blaster is not as strong as even the early chapters of Black Butler. But Yana Toboso's art is really nice in Rust Blaster, and I've heard people say that they consider Rust Blaster to be more aesthetically pleasing or higher quality art than the first few chapters of Black Butler. It's got that early 2000s manga charm to it, but it's still distinctly Yana Toboso's art. I found myself finding certain panels very reminiscent of the art she would later draw in Black Butler, and it's cool to compare how her style has changed and what things have stayed the same over time. I've heard Rust Blaster be compared to both Vampire Knight and Soul Eater, since it's a vampire story where the characters turn into weapons, and also a big part of the story is the fact that vampires are trying to live alongside humans, which is a huge point in Vampire Knight. It really does feel like a mashup. Soul Eater and Vampire Knight both started in 2004. I'm not sure if Yana Toboso was inspired at all by these two works, but the early 2000s were kind of vampire central. Many anime and manga surrounding vampires came out during this time, and we also had the popularity of the Twilight books. Throughout the 90s, we also had hits like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the Vampire Diaries books that the not super great TV show were based off of. So I guess you could say that they were a pretty popular thing to write stories about. Vampires have always been very popular, but I think it was the 90s and early 2000s that really saw a boom. To be fair, I was born in 1997, so I'm not entirely sure what I'm talking about when it comes to anything before 2005. But just based on my experiences growing up and the patterns in media that I have seen, vampires are kind of a huge deal, more so during this time period than before, and definitely more so than they are now. That was the vampire years. That is before the vampire bubble burst, however, and dystopian fiction rose in its ashes, at least in American media. All in all, Rust Blaster is an okay manga. It's not very long, and it only took me around an hour to read, so I'm not mad at it. I think I would give the series a solid 6. It's fine. It could be better, but it's not hot garbage, so I think a 6 is pretty fair, which is a little below the average rating of a 7 something, but not too far off. I did enjoy seeing where Yana Toboso was at in her craft before starting Black Butler, though. I am aware that there are some previous BL works that a lot of people have attributed to Yana Toboso. However, I don't know for certain if it's her. It's most likely her because the art style is the same, but it's a different pen name that has not been confirmed nor denied. But I have not read these. So Rust Blaster was my first time experiencing something that came before Black Butler from Yana Toboso. So it was a really fun experience. It's easy to compare early Black Butler to more recent chapters and see a huge change in her art and maybe even some of her storytelling. But I feel it adds extra insight to her growth to see how she crafted these shorter stories before Black Butler. Seeing the rushed mess that Rust Blaster turned into at the end, it makes it easier to see why she made some of the choices that she did before Black Butler was picked up to be a long-running series. On the flip side, it's nice to see that she seemingly always had an interest in balancing comedy with high-stakes action and angst, the two tones shifting to provide contrast and balance throughout the story. Although I will say, the tonal shifts in Rust Blaster were a lot more sudden and felt less natural than in Black Butler, but Black Butler also has some pretty wild shifts here and there, so maybe it just is what it is. I think Rust Blaster could have been something very cool if it had the space to really be fleshed out. It was a pretty solid idea, and it could have been really good, but it had very little room for execution. And I believe that is why the first few chapters of Black Butler are fairly self-contained. There's no larger narrative at play here because Yana Toboso didn't know if she'd be allowed to run with it. So it makes sense that in order to avoid the headache I'm sure Rust Blaster was for her to make and condense into 6 chapters, why Black Butler was so episodic at the start. Even with Jack the Ripper being kind of short, and also the series could have ended there. I'm not entirely sure, I've never been able to verify this information, but I've always heard that Jack the Ripper, that Red Butler arc, was not... Let me step back. I've always heard, but I've been unable to confirm, that Black Butler was not greenlit to be a full running series until after the Red Butler arc. So we had the first initial chapter setting it up, and then she got approval to do a little bit more with it, and then after the Red Butler arc is when she got the go-ahead to make it what it is today. I'm not sure how true that is. I can't verify that information, but it is an interesting thing to think about. This is a Rust Blaster video. I'm spending too much time talking about Black Butler. But anyway, all in all, I would read Rust Blaster if I were you. It's kind of fun to see where she started, and it's not all that bad. It's not all that bad. I know a lot of people say that they think the main characters kind of look like Ciel and Sebastian. Not really. Honestly, I hear that a lot about the BL work that may or may not be hers. So do with that what you will. But I could definitely see some influences in her style of character design from Rust Blaster into Black Butler, which was really cool. And I think it's a sign that I'm talking more about Black Butler than I am Rust Blaster. We should wrap this up here. Anyway, thank you guys so much for coming on this journey with me. If you're interested in reading Rust Blaster, give it a shot. If you have read it, what did you think about it? Did you enjoy it? Do you even like vampire stories? Can you see the connections between Rust Blaster and Black Butler? Are there any? I mean, there's sad children with a little bit of traumatic backstories, but I mean, Yana Toboso didn't invent that concept. But anyway, that's it for me. I'll see you all in the next one. I hope you have a good one. Bye!